Good morning, everybody. So I'm with the Louisiana Sea Grant Law and Policy Program, but I want to make it clear that what I'm presenting today is not research that I actually did. The National Sea Grant Law and Policy Program compiled this information and put this presentation together, but they couldn't make it to the meeting today. So they asked me to kind of be their mouthpiece and give the presentation for them. And so a couple of key facts about this situation in particular. For the Deepwater Horizon, there was an unprecedented volume of dispersant that was used and for an unprecedented duration of time. This was the first time any subsea application was used, but everything was done in accordance with law. The issue that came up is that EPA realized that there were some serious weaknesses in the regulatory framework as it exists currently. That protocols are outdated and there's a lack of monitoring requirements, and the Deepwater Horizon incident really brought this to light. So I'm going to cover the existing law first. The National Oil and Hazard Substances Pollution Contingency Plan was first published in 1970, and this actually came about in the late 1960s. There was the grounding of the Torrey Canyon off Cornwall, England, that released 120,000 tons of crude oil into the Atlantic, and the EPA realized that if a situation happened like that in the U.S., we really didn't have any protocols or regulations to deal with that. And so the National Contingency Plan was first published in 1970, and it was last revised in 94, and that was in direct response to the passage of the Oil Pollution Act in 1990. And the purpose of the NCP is to provide efficient, coordinated, and effective action to minimize damage from oil and hazardous substances, including containment, dispersal, and removal of oil or hazardous substances. And when these spills occur in or threaten coastal waters, the U.S. Coast Guard is the lead. So the way it works in terms of dispersants is that there's something called a product schedule. This schedule is actually a list of dispersants and other chemicals or other means that can be used in response to an oil spill. The schedule is developed and maintained by EPA. It identifies the dispersants, other chemicals, and other spill mitigating devices that can be used when carrying out the National Contingency Plan, the waters in which those dispersants and other chemicals may be used, and the quantities of dispersants and other chemicals that may be used in those waters. It provides a current definition for dispersant. The current definition is that a dispersant is a chemical agent that emulsifies, disperses, or solubilizes water or oil into the water column, or promotes the surface spreading of oil slicks to facilitate dispersal of the oil into the water column. Dispersants have to be listed on the schedule before they can be used, with one exception. So if there's a situation that is substantially threatening human life and there is a chemical that's not on the schedule that can help reduce that risk, that chemical can be approved for use even though it's not on the schedule. The two forms of Corexit that were used in Deepwater Horizon, 9527 and 9500. 9527 was listed on March 10th, 1978, and 9500 was listed on April 13th, 1994. So in order to get on the schedule, the manufacturer of the chemical, of the dispersant, needs to submit 12 data requirements to EPA. Those include the application, how it should be applied, what concentration, what conditions it would be used in, storage requirements, any effectiveness testing that has been done. Now, under current law, the swirling flask test is used, and it has to disperse at least 45% of the oil under this test. Now I'm going to bring up this effectiveness issue in a little bit, just because this is one of the things that the proposed revisions are going to change. They also have to submit toxicity testing results. These tests are limited under current law to immediate impact on one fish species and one shrimp species, but there isn't any threshold requirement for these testing. So they have to do the test for toxicity, but it doesn't have to meet any certain standard or level. They just have to do the test. And this is also going to be one of the proposed changes. But they do have to meet that effectiveness, that 45% effectiveness threshold. Once the manufacturer submits a dispersant for consideration, EPA reviews the information they've submitted, makes sure they've got their packet together, and makes a decision. It's important to note that EPA doesn't do any of their own independent testing in order to get on the schedule. So they just look at what was submitted by the manufacturer and make their decision from there. Once on the list, it doesn't mean that EPA approves the use. It just means that the federal on-scene coordinator can decide that the dispersant would be appropriate to use, and the regional response team has to agree to that decision by the on-scene coordinator. The manufacturer does have to notify EPA of any changes to the product, and just to reiterate, the on-scene coordinator may authorize use of a product not on the schedule without obtaining concurrence from EPA if it would be necessary to prevent or substantially reduce a hazard to human life. Currently, there is only one way that a product can be removed from the schedule, and so, for example, you saw that one of the Corexits was approved in the very early in the 1970s. The only way a product can be removed under current law is that if a product is labeled or advertised as being on the schedule, there's a certain statement by EPA that has to be on the product word for word. Or there has to be a certain disclaimer by EPA on the product word for word. And if that disclaimer is not on the product, or if the wording is incorrect, it can be removed from the schedule. And this is the only reason that a product can be removed. So on January 22nd, EPA released proposed revisions to Subpart J of the National Contingency Plan. It was open for public comment until April 22nd. And during that time, more than 80,000 comments were turned in. The document, if you want to read all the proposed revisions, it's about 80 pages long through the Federal Register. You can track the rule by signing up, and I know this link isn't showing up very well, but it's www.regulations.gov, and you just search this docket ID. And y'all will all have a copy of this, so you'll be able to get, you don't have to worry about writing it down. But that will give you email updates if there's any updates to the proposed revisions. So comment period closed. The EPA now has to go through and address all of the comments that it received to make any necessary changes to the proposed regulations, and then the final rule is expected sometime in 2016, but we're not exactly sure when. So what I'm going to talk about from here on out is the proposed revisions, and I just want to stress that this is not current law, and this may not even be what actually comes out in the final draft. This is just what we know is proposed at this point. So the first thing, oh, and also this is just a selection. Like I said, it was 80 pages long, and so these are just some of the high points. There are some other changes, but these are the ones I think would be most important to you guys. The first thing is they're proposing to change the definition of a dispersant to make it a little more clear about what a dispersant actually is. And the proposed definition is dispersants are typically mixtures of solvents, surfactants, and additives that promote the formation of small droplets of oil in the water column by reducing the oil-water interfacial tension. They want to change the way the effectiveness of the dispersant is tested, and so they're going to replace the swirling flask test with the baffled flask test, and I don't understand what either of those tests are, so don't ask me any questions about that. But the baffled flask test has undergone extensive scientific review and produces much more reliable and reproducible results. And so they're hoping that this is going to be a little bit of a better test of the effectiveness. They have actually been trying to change the swirling flask test method for decades, and it just kind of got stopped each time they went to do it. And so we're hopeful that this will go through into the final revisions. They want to increase the effectiveness. So like I said, under the swirling flask test, it's a 45% effectiveness level in dispersing the oil. They're going to actually change it to where now they're going to test two different oils. They're going to test intermediate fuel oil and Alaskan North Slope crude oil. And under those two tests, they're going to test them at two different temperatures, 5 degrees Celsius and 25 degrees Celsius. And they want it to remove 55 to 75%, disperse 55 to 75% of the oil at those temperatures. And the range is because at different combinations of temperature and oil results in a different percentage that it will have to meet. What's also interesting is that this effectiveness level, like I said, it's going to be testing 2 different oils, and while neither of the oils are the Louisiana oil, it will be more related to the oil that we have here. They're also going to change the toxicity tests, and this is really important because, as I said before, toxicity can be used by the on-scene coordinator now to decide if a dispersant should be used in a given situation, but it doesn't have any impact on whether or not it gets on the schedule. They are actually going to now require these toxicity tests to be part of the determination of if a dispersant is placed on the schedule. They're going to have to test 2 saltwater species, the mysis shrimp and the inland silverside, and now they're going to test it 3 different ways: dispersant alone, dispersant mixed with Alaska North Slope crude oil, and dispersant mixed with intermediate fuel oil. So this will require a lot more toxicity testing to be done. They're also adding a test, and this is completely new, on sea urchin embryo development to see how the dispersant is going to impact the species when it's in embryo form. They're also adding a requirement for long-term impacts of dispersal alone to the 2 species. Right now, there's no long-term testing that's required, and so this will be a really good addition for toxicity. As I said before, there was only one very limited way in which a product could be removed from the schedule. They're now adding, under the proposed revisions, a number of ways for a product to get removed from the schedule. Some of these are listed. These include misleading, inaccurate, or incorrect statements within the product submission or on the labels, advertisements, or technical literature, alterations to the product without proper notification, failure to include the required disclaimers on labels and advertisements, and this last one I think is really important, and that is new information concerning potential impacts to human health or the environment. And so they're allowing for, if new testing down the road shows that there's information that wasn't available when it was placed on the schedule, that information can be used to get a product off of the schedule. There will be an appeal process for manufacturers to go through if their product is removed to try to get it back onto the schedule. There's going to be a new requirement that the on-scene coordinator provide the regional response team certain information after the use of a chemical or biological agent, and that they're going to have to give the regional response team the name of the products used, the quantity and concentration, the duration of use, the locations used, and any data collected on the effectiveness or environmental effects. This will be really important because this data that's collected can be used for, proposed revisions to the schedule if a product's going to be removed. What we see as the biggest policy change is that there is going to be the establishment of a monitoring requirement for dispersant use. So currently there is no requirement for monitoring use of dispersant. Under the proposed revisions, monitoring will be required in 3 different situations. One is going to be subsurface use of dispersants in response to an oil discharge, surface use of dispersants in response to oil discharges of more than 100,000 gallons occurring within 24 hours, and surface use of dispersants for more than 96 hours in response to an oil discharge. So what they're really looking to get to here is that when you're using large amounts of dispersants or using them in a way that maybe isn't quite so common, they're going to have to monitor that use. And so the responsible party would be required to document characteristics of oil and flow rate, dispersant product information, including why that product was chosen, the application method, procedures, and rates. And they would also have to require daily collection of the water column from the dispersed oil plume. And so that would provide great information about how effective the dispersant is at doing what they want it to do. So as I said, I'm just presenting this information. My office didn't do the research on it. So if you have any questions, the main contact for this information is Stephanie Showalter-Otts. She's the director of the National Sea Grant Law Center, and her phone number and email are here. But I'm also happy to try to answer any questions or to field questions, to direct them to her, and my phone number and email are below as well. This information is going to be published in a bulletin format. It's about 4 pages long. The draft is pretty much complete, and the final version will be out in early 2016, probably early January. And you can find it on the National Sea Grant Law Center website.